Thank you, Father Coop, Father Becker, Reverend Fathers, any honored guests, and my brothers. As a child, my parents provided me with the simple yet sufficient grounds upon which God has done his work. They readily had me baptized by my grandfather, a deacon, and by the time I was potty trained, my mother was already reading to me from the beginner's Bible and teaching me to say my prayers before bed. I can also recall that Fridays consisted of dinners without meat or pop, and Sundays meant the 11 o'clock Mass and a visit to Grandma's afterwards. Now, while my three older brothers went to local public grade schools, one would think I would do the same. But I was sent to our parish's school for kindergarten through 8th grade, and from there, destined to wear a uniform for the rest of my life. Now, in 5th grade, if not before, something peculiar started to happen. Whenever I heard about vocations to the priesthood, some sort of movement would happen within me, and the brief thought would arise, what if that's me he's talking about? But just as suddenly as this thought had appeared, it would be lost amidst a preoccupation with sports, Halo, and more Halo. These movements would continue to gently nudge me, meanwhile growing in their effects, until one night, May 5th, 2008, just regular Monday night, I was in my room doing my homework when all of a sudden, out of nowhere in the corner of my room, there's just this big flash of light, and it nearly knocked me out of my chair, and I just heard this voice that was so strong and calm, and it said, "James, you are to be a priest." But actually, that's not really what happened. Rather, that night, like pieces of a puzzle, all my activities, my desires, things people had said to me, things I'd done, pretty much my entire life up to that point, all seemed to fit together in regards to one thing, the priesthood. And in this moment, God was pretty clear. And after much internal struggle, I told my parents, and they were like, "Yeah, we're not all that surprised." I was like, "What? You could have warned me or something." But then, in retrospect, now that I think about it, I did end up going to an Operation Andrews dinner really recently, right before that, so I can understand why they knew about that. For me, this experience turned out to be very overwhelming. Up till this point, I was pretty oblivious as to what I wanted to do with my life, and yet now my entire life seemed to have just been laying out before me. So it was not long before I tried to strike a deal with God. Okay, listen, if you lay off on the pressure for a little bit and the intense feelings and just let me live a normal high school life and do what I want to, then I promise I'll get back to you, say junior, senior year of high school, and I'll pursue this whole priesthood thing. And to my surprise, God's response was something like, "Okay, your will be done. I'm not going to force you to do anything." And I was just like, sweet. And from that point forward, I never doubted that I would pursue the priesthood. It was always there in the back of my head, just another fact of my life. Yet I was relieved God was off my back for the time being. And while I was intent in doing God's will in the long run, I desired to do whatever I wanted to in the meantime, so I did. After 8th grade graduation, I followed in my brother's footsteps to Bennett Academy, a college prep Catholic high school. And there I worked hard in my classes, did soccer, swimming, and volleyball, spent a lot of my free time, playing Xbox. But come chemistry class sophomore year, I sat next to a girl I had met in Spanish class the year before, and before I knew it, I had a new girlfriend with whom I would spend much of the next 2 years. Everything was pretty much as I wanted it, and a lot of what I was doing was by no means inherently bad. But then again, there were those nights, lying in bed, forced to just be in the stillness, in the silence, and I would feel the emptiness inside, the lack of peace. And if I were more honest with myself, I would have grasped that I was more or less being a hypocrite, trying to live a double life of sin and faith, but I was too busy with my own will. To give more of myself to God seemed too hard, too great of a sacrifice of what I thought was my happiness. Although emotional desolation became very real throughout my last few semesters of high school, what with the breakup and injuries in sports, amongst other things, I never despaired. I clung to what consolations I could find, and seeing the inevitability of seminary looming, I decided to take my faith a little bit more seriously. Since no one else was serving daily mass at my school, I took up the opportunity and got to school every day to serve. Likewise, I found myself taking advantage of the confessions offered during study hall by a generous Benedictine monk. These sacraments, coupled with my nightly prayer and spiritual reading, which had been instilled in me by my mother so many years prior, gave me the strength to finish high school strong, to complete the application process for Joliet, and to become accepted as a seminarian. So, after a quiet and anxious 7-hour trip with my parents, I arrived at SJV entirely unsure of what to expect. Yet, after only 2 days here, I remember lying in bed, drained from the hectic schedule and sweating from the hot, late summer air, forced once again into that silence. But something was different, something I'd never felt before. There was a peace within me, a peace beyond all understanding. At this point, I was no longer avoiding who I was as God's beloved. Finally, I was saying readily and more honestly in my heart, not my will, but yours be done. And since then, even though I continue to fall far short of perfection, he has led me and drawn me ever closer to himself and to a greater fulfillment of my very existence. My gifts are being realized, my desires purified, and my life sanctified, all to extents I never thought possible. But the thing that has amazed me the most in my life is that none of this was my doing. It was all his initiative, his tireless pursuit of me. He didn't have to forgive me. He didn't have to pursue my salvation. He just as easily could have left me to my own will, allowed me to go on in my false sense of freedom, blindly stumbling in search of fulfillment. No, he wants me to be happy, and he knows exactly what it is that will fulfill me and how to get me there. And he has done everything short of infringing upon my free will to get me here. Because, as is the case with all of his children, he loves me that much. The Father has drawn me, and I have thus come to Christ. All I had to do was give my fiat, my yes. And let me tell you, I have never regretted it. Praise be Jesus Christ. Now and forever.